This video is produced for entertainment purposes only. All credit to the author of this novel, Shui Qian Chen. The following spoilers are from the novel and the series will differ, so don't expect all of this in the series. If you want to read the novel, then visit patreon.com/blspoilers. The link will be in the description. Don't forget to like, comment, and tell us how we can improve. Enjoy. Let's start with the video. Chapter 50 Summary. Joe was taken aback when he heard a familiar voice. It turned out to be Saul, his former close friend who knew where he kept the spare key. Thinking there was a thief in Joe's home, Saul stepped on Joe's calf while he was on the ground. In pain, Joe threw soil from a potted plant at Saul, allowing him to escape. Joe ran away and removed his disguise. He felt relieved when he saw that Saul hadn't caught up. However, he was worried about how to explain the situation if he was caught. He also didn't want to take the risk of revealing his identity. Joe hid near his neighborhood and saw Woot's car enter. He knew his plan had failed. Saul, who was shocked to find a thief in Joe's home, called Woot for help. They discussed how to handle the situation, and Ming would surely find out. Ming would be more strictly guarded in the future, making it impossible for Joe to return to his condo. Joe checked the cards in his pocket and found his TCB card. However, he didn't dare use it in case it was reported as lost. He put the cards back and felt disappointed about the loss. The next morning, Joe planned to go to the company to get information from Woot regarding the incident. However, Art warned him not to go, as Ming and Saul were arguing in the company. Joe's heart thumped when he heard that Ming was there. Art told him that Ming and Saul didn't get along and had fought before. Ming had gone abroad, likely to avoid Saul. Art advised Joe not to go to Woot's office, but Joe snuck towards it. Chapter 51 Summary. In Woot's office, Ming and Saul argue over the burglary at Joe's condo. Ming is protective of the place, which holds memories of him and Joe. Woot, who hates Ming but doesn't dare to offend him, mediates. They decide to handle the matter quietly and call the police, but not publicize it. Saul, the only one who has seen the thief, will describe the thief's appearance to the police. Joe, who is actually the thief, overhears their conversation and gets scared. He had not considered the surveillance cameras. He is worried about being caught by the police and that he can't go back to his condo. After Ming and Saul leave, Joe enters Woot's office. Woot informs him that his dead friend's condo was burglarized and Saul ran into the thief. Joe feigns surprise, and Woot shares his suspicion that Ming might have called Joe for the ad because he likes him. Joe dismisses the idea and asks for more work. Woot advises him to take it slow and prioritize his health. Later, Joe receives a text message from a strange number, asking if he has considered being Tong's stuntman again. Joe deletes the message, as he does not want to return to that life. In the afternoon, Joe gets a call from a man who informs him that his mother fainted during her training. Joe rushes to his mother's side, leaving the installation work unfinished. Chapter 52 Summary. The doctor suspected that Ying has a kidney disease, which could be any number of illnesses such as kidney inflammation, uremia, diabetes, kidney failure, or kidney cancer. Joe is worried, but Ying is already suffering from the loss of her husband. She is motivated to live only for her son. Ying doesn't know that Joe's soul is no longer her son's, but Joe feels guilty and plans to keep it a secret. He fears that Ying might leave this world with regrets and unwillingness. Ying's condition is severe, and Joe clutches the medical record, trembling with fear. The doctor reassures Joe, telling him not to be pessimistic, but Joe knows he needs to be strong for Ying. After the fluid transfusion, Ying regains consciousness. Ying sees Joe and is relieved, her dark pupils shining with hope. Joe takes Ying home and tells her not to work hard. Ying cries, feeling that their lives are too hard. Joe coaxes her to sleep, feeling helpless and in pain. He knows that they will need money for Ying's treatment, and he needs to find a way to make more. Joe thinks about Pajoy's text message and realizes that he needs to take any job he can get. He calls Woot and tells him about the opportunity to be Tong's stuntman. Woot is hesitant, but Joe knows that he needs to take the opportunity to make money. Woot reminds Joe of his unpleasant experience with Tong in the past, but Joe is determined to take the job. Woot reluctantly agrees to help him get connected through the company. Joe thanks Woot and prepares to take on the new opportunity, hoping that it will bring him the financial stability that he needs. Chapter 53. Summary. Pajoy called Joe to inform him that Tong had found a stuntman due to Joe's delay. Joe hurried to the set and Pajoy suggested that he should replace the stuntman if he performed better. Joe had complex feelings about Tong due to a past incident involving Ming. Tong, the film's lead, was discussing the script with the director. Joe, feeling inferior, respectfully addressed him as P. Tong. Tong, unaware of their past, asked Joe his name and told him that if he outperformed the other stuntman, he would be chosen. After getting dressed, Joe greeted the director, but the director didn't recognize him. Joe performed a series of action moves for the director, who was impressed and chose him as the stuntman. Joe then discussed the stunt scenes with the stunt coordinator, who was also impressed by his professionalism. The stunt coordinator and Joe modified more than half of the previous action sequences. During the filming, Joe saw Ming, who was there to visit Tong. Ming was surprised to see Joe, who had become Tong's stuntman after his accident. Tong, unaware of their past, praised Joe's performance, and Ming became uncomfortable. Joe left to get food and Assistant Jim followed him, asking him to bring an extra takeout for Ming. Joe reluctantly agreed and brought the food to Ming, who was in the lounge. Ming asked Joe about his past and Joe carefully answered, trying to hide their connection. Ming, however, was still suspicious and decided to investigate Joe's background. After finishing their meal, Joe left to discuss the scenes with the director and Tong. Ming, taking the initiative, asked Tong if there was a suitable role for him in the film. Tong, surprised, immediately offered him a role. Chapter 54. Summary. Joe is uncomfortable with Ming's presence while reshooting a scene. He learns that director Pong plans to add a role for Ming as the sickly brother of the protagonist, which will be crucial to the plot. Joe is surprised that Ming has never guest-starred in other people's films, except for Tong's. While taking a break, Joe overhears Ming discussing the investigation with someone on the phone. Ming is looking for a reliable person to investigate the theft, and Joe becomes worried. He fears the investigation might reveal suspicious loopholes in the theft case. Joe decides to return to the crime scene and destroy any evidence before Ming brings the investigator. He asks the staff if they want to go out singing and drinking, and to his surprise, Ming agrees to join them. At the nightclub, Joe tries to get Ming drunk. A young man approaches Joe and assumes that he is gay, but Joe smiles at the young man and looks in Ming's direction, which the young man notices. Ming suddenly appears and drags Joe out of the private room, asking him if he is gay. Joe confirms that he is, and Ming demands to know who he really is. Joe explains that his name is Joe and that Pawut told him not to reveal his real name to Tong. Ming asks how much Joe knows about the original Joe, and Joe explains that Pawut only told him that Joe used to be Tong's stuntman and had offended him. Ming tells Joe to stay out of Joe's matters. Joe remains calm and tells Ming that he has never asked about it. Ming leaves, and Joe returns to the private room. Ming sits in the corner, not participating in the activities. Joe brings him a glass of wine and thanks him for his preferential treatment. To everyone's surprise, Ming takes the glass and drinks with Joe. Joe plans to get Ming drunk tonight. Chapter 55. Summary. Ming realized that Joe was trying to get him drunk. Despite his low tolerance for alcohol, he continued to drink and began feeling dizzy after 3 glasses. Joe admitted wanting to get Ming drunk, claiming that Ming might forget him once he sobered up. Ming felt strange emotions, comparing Joe to an older Joe. As the party continued, Ming drank more, and eventually, most of the attendees were drunk. Joe and Ming were the last ones remaining, with Assistant Jim staying sober to drive them home. Joe helped Ming into the car, and they both squeezed into the back seat. Joe fell asleep during the drive, and when they arrived at Ming's apartment, they struggled to get Ming inside. In the process, Ming leaned on Joe, and when he woke up, he kissed Joe. Assistant Jim, who was helping them, was shocked and decided to leave, giving them privacy. Ming cried, asking if he was old Joe, but then fell asleep, leaving Joe confused and unsure of what had just happened. Joe couldn't move Ming, who was clinging to him, and he didn't want to wake him up. He reminisced about their past relationship, feeling the warmth of Ming's body through his shirt. Joe was afraid to move, fearing that the scene would disappear and turn out to be an illusion. He gently touched Ming's back, feeling the heat from his body, and realized that Ming was the same person he had once been close to, but they were no longer the same people. Chapter 56. Summary. Joe carefully moved away from Ming's embrace and laid him on the sofa, covering him with a blanket. It was 4 a.m., and he needed to leave before it got too bright. He took a taxi to his old neighborhood. He entered the building through a remote back door and made his way up to their condo, using a spare key he had hidden. Inside, the condo looked just as he had left it. He quickly ransacked the bedroom and tried to make it look like a burglary had occurred. His goal was to create confusion and hinder the investigation into his theft. After less than 10 minutes, he left the condo and returned home. The next day, Joe and Ying went to the hospital to receive the results of Ying's medical tests. They were informed that Ying had uremia, a serious kidney condition. However, as long as Ying undergoes regular dialysis, she can prolong her life. Unfortunately, the cost of treatment is high, and Ying's medical insurance has been depleted. Joe felt desperate, as he had no money to support Ying's medical treatments. Ying, on the other hand, decided not to undergo treatment, not wanting to burden Joe. However, Joe refused to accept this and did everything he could to convince Ying to get treated. Joe then asked if Ying had any medical insurance or similar that could be used. Ying shook her head, having used up her medical insurance after her husband's death and Joe's hospitalization. Joe racked his brain to think of ways to make money, but there was nothing. In the end, Joe was left with no choice but to contemplate his next move. He couldn't ask Woot for money, as he couldn't pay him back. He also couldn't ask Sol, as he didn't want to take advantage of their friendship. Joe felt trapped, with no one to turn to for help. Chapter 57. Summary. Joe secretly had his kidney tested for compatibility with Ying's, despite his fears of the surgery and Ying's potential rejection. He feels a responsibility to help Ying, as the youngster whose body he now inhabits is her son. Back at home, Joe cooks noodles for Ying, who has just returned from a long and grueling dialysis treatment. She can only bring herself to eat half a bowl. Joe urges Ying to continue with her treatments, which will now be twice a week. Joe decides to hire a caretaker to accompany Ying to her treatments, as he cannot miss work and fears Ying will refuse to go without him. He thinks of a potential caretaker, an auntie who has shown enthusiasm and strength. However, he realizes that their current apartment is too small for another person. Joe is overwhelmed by the financial burden of hiring a caretaker and continuing Ying's treatments. He decides to call the caretaker the next day. Joe's money troubles consume him, and he fears that he will not have enough to support Ying's treatments and living expenses for more than a few months. He considers asking his friend Woot for a loan, but worries about burdening him. He also considers asking President Wang for help, but realizes this would only solve his immediate needs. Joe is at a loss for how to obtain more money. Suddenly, Joe considers asking Ming for help. Joe now weighs his pride against Ying's life. He decides to ask Woot for a loan first, and then ask President Wang for additional help. With this money, he could support Ying's treatments until the end of the year. Joe's phone rings, interrupting his thoughts. It is Woot, who offers him 250,000 Thai bahts and promises to ask President Wang for more help. Joe is grateful but feels guilty for accepting such a large sum of money from Woot. He stays in the kitchen for a long time, feeling a sense of security in the small space. Assistant Jim calls, and Joe answers, expecting it to be Woot. Instead, Ming's voice comes through the phone. Ming demands that Joe come to his place immediately. Joe makes excuses, but Ming insists, causing Joe to become irritated and hang up the phone. Joe feels a deep hatred for Ming, blaming him for his current situation. He wishes that all memories of Ming would disappear from his life. Chapter 58. Summary. The next morning, Joe called Aunt Wang to care for Ying and take her to the hospital twice a week. They agreed on a payment of 400 Thai bahts each time she came. Joe couldn't afford a full-time caretaker due to limited money, so he had to find ways to make more money. Woot gave Joe a bank card with 250,000 Thai bahts to help with urgent needs. He warned Joe not to tell others in the company about it. Joe felt overwhelmed with the tasks waiting for him and the need to make more money. Woot advised Joe to be strong and not to be discouraged about the future. Joe felt he owed Woot too much and couldn't reveal his big secret. Woot's expression was deep as he warned Joe not to get too close to Ming. Joe met with Jim, who warned him about Ming's unusual background and advised him not to provoke him. Joe was not worried about Ming's reaction to hanging up on him. Jim suspected that Ming had fallen for Joe, despite not understanding why. Joe arrived at Ming's upscale neighborhood and felt nervous about the meeting. Jim led him to Ming's apartment, where Ming coldly invited him in. Joe couldn't suppress his nervousness as Ming dragged him inside. Thank you for watching. If you want to read the novel, then visit patreon.com/blspoilers. The link will be in the description. Special thanks to my legendary supporters: Melanie Harris, Kiara Russell, Rebecca, Anne, Brian Stargill, Chelsea 212, Suzanne 233, Tamara Coomer, Ms. T, Maria Lalbachian, Sharon Fong, Martina Bosinkova, S. Armstrong, Pibri, Ed.